Hello friends, today we're going to be making shakshuka. Now you can make shakshuka in many ways, but my personal favorite is with grape tomatoes. For this shakshuka recipe, we're going to be using 3 cloves of garlic, a 1/4 cup of cilantro, 1 serrano pepper. Now I want to say this is optional, but don't you dare. I'm going to be using 3 eggs, 1 per person, or 2 each if you have no side dishes. And about 1/2 pound of grape tomatoes. Now this next step is completely optional. What I like to do is cut open about half of the tomatoes. Compared to regular tomatoes, grape tomatoes have a higher sugar content, so this will help start the caramelization process a little early, shortening the total cooking time. The next step is to prepare the garlic cloves. Now here's a neat little trick you can use to peel them. Give them a good shake in a mason jar like this one, or honestly you can use any container with a lid, and they should come right off. Once you have all the cloves peeled, at this point you want to give them a rough chop. You want to avoid mincing them too small. We're going to roast them at some point, and if they're too small they're going to end up charring really easily. When it comes to preparing the serrano pepper, you definitely want to give it a quick heat check. Serrano peppers are significantly hotter than jalapenos, but the skin is a lot thinner and easier to mask in the dish, which is exactly why I love using them. You want to open up the pepper at this point and clean out any seeds as well as any white flesh. This is going to make the heat a lot more manageable and avoids any bitter flavors. Now if the pepper is really hot, I'd recommend using about half of it to start and then scaling it down, but trust me, shakshuka definitely needs a little bit of a kick. Once the serrano pepper is cleaned up nicely, at this point you want to give it a good mince. To make this a little easier, what I like to do is cut it into thin strips first and then mince it. The goal here is to make it as small as possible. You don't want someone to end up with a big chunk of serrano. It's definitely not fun. To prepare the cilantro, you want to trim the stems and then give it a rough chop. Now I know some of you don't like cilantro. It's okay to substitute it with parsley, scallions, or even chives. This is going to be added to the shakshuka at the end. It's going to introduce an element of freshness which really brings the dish to life, but also makes it quite photogenic. At this point we're ready to start cooking. We're going to be using a medium-sized pan on medium heat. The first step is to roast the garlic. To do that we're going to need 1.5 tablespoons of refined olive oil. You can use your preferred oil of choice instead, and I'll sometimes use avocado oil, but honestly I find olive oil's flavor profile pairs best with the caramelized garlic. After a few minutes it's time to add the garlic. If the oil is not bubbling when you add the garlic, it's not hot enough. If the oil is smoking, that means it's too hot. Make sure all your garlic is coated with oil. Now this caramelization process should happen fairly quickly, and what we're looking for is a golden brown color. This is where you want to add the tomatoes. If you ended up cutting some of them open, you want to add those first and wait a bit on the rest. Otherwise you can just add all of them. Be sure to give it a quick toss. You want some of the oil to get on the tomatoes so it helps caramelize, and you want the flavors to get to know each other. Season the tomatoes with about 1 teaspoon of salt, about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Make sure you give that a quick toss as well. After a few minutes, if you have any tomatoes left over, this is where you want to add them. This is also where you want to add the peppers. Now cooking them this early will help take the edge off the heat and add a bit of a smoky flavor. Don't forget to give everything a quick toss. And pretend you didn't see that. I'm a trained professional, as you can see. Add a pinch of salt to accommodate the extra ingredients. One thing to note is that grape tomatoes have a lower water content than your average tomato. If you feel like your pan's getting a bit dry, you can just add some water. I added about 1/3 of a cup here. If you add too much, that's okay, it's going to evaporate eventually. After about 5 minutes of caramelizing everything on medium heat, you want to cover the pan, and you also want to turn down the heat to about a medium-low. Now my stove is on a scale of 10 and I set it to about a 3. The goal here is to break down the tomatoes. This usually takes 10 to 15 minutes, but feel free to check the pan every 5 minutes or so. You should be able to see the bottom of the pan momentarily when you separate the tomatoes. You can also feel out the tomatoes themselves. They should be quite easy to flatten when they're ready. At this point you want to add your eggs, so make a small divot by moving the tomatoes aside. The nice thing about using grape tomatoes is the shakshuka is not as liquidy, which makes this step a lot easier. When you crack your eggs open, try your best not to break the yolk. We're going for softly cooked sunny side up eggs. You're going to want your eggs to be a little runny for the best results. Don't forget to season your eggs with a little bit of salt and a little bit of black pepper. Cover your pan once again and let your eggs cook for about 3 minutes or so. You'll know when your eggs are ready when the egg whites turn opaque and you can't see the yolk anymore. Keep in mind the eggs will continue to cook for a few minutes after you take them off the stove. If your egg doesn't have a bit of a bounce to it, then you probably cooked it for too long. This next step is optional, but I like to add a generous sprinkle of cheese. I'm using mozzarella here, but feta and smoked Gouda also work well. Sometimes tomatoes can be a little tart, and the richness in the cheese helps balance that out. Plus, who doesn't like melted cheese? This is also where you're going to sprinkle the cilantro on top, or whatever fresh herb you ended up using. And here you have it, shakshuka with grape tomatoes. When it comes to eating shakshuka, it's usually served with pita bread. Now in this video I'm using Arabic pita bread, but you can also use Greek pita bread or even toast. I usually heat my pita bread directly on an open flame like this, but if you don't have a gas stove, you can use an oven or even a pan. Please don't use a microwave, unless soggy bread's your thing, I guess. Serving the shakshuka is pretty easy, just make sure you avoid breaking the eggs. If there's anything you should take away from this video, it's that shakshuka is one of the easiest and most flavorful dishes you can make. You only need a few basic ingredients for a flavor-packed dish, and you can customize it to your heart's content. I've seen people make this with onions, bell peppers, eggplants, and even beef. I usually make this for breakfast, but you can honestly make this for any meal of the day. All that's left at this point is to enjoy your dish. What I personally like to do first is break the egg and let the yolk seep into the rest of the dish. A tip for anyone eating this with pita bread, you'll want to break off a small piece and use 4 fingers to scoop the food with the bread. This is going to take some time to get used to, but that's okay. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you loved it as much as I loved making it. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more cooking content. I have a lot of recipes coming out, so stay tuned. Mushu! Hello Mushu, say hello. Now I know there's a ton of recipes online for shakshuka, but ايش في already سمعتك بتوشوشي.
لا مش لازم تحكي بس شكشوك، بسموها الفلسطينيين الشكشوك زي ما خلات بيض وبندوره نفس الاسم، نفس احكي لها اسماء كثيره في فلسطين كذا واحكي لهم.